off. It is 7:04. I'll call the order of this meeting of the Hamilton Master Steering Committee. If I could get a roll call just by committee members, we'll take attendance, then we can kick things off. So Marnie, we'll start with you.
Marnie Crouch, present.
Thank you.
Dana Lara, present.
Hey, Dana.
Kristen Piper, present.
Hey, Kristen.
Lauren Lynch, present.
Hey, Lauren. Okay, and Bill Wilson present. I don't see anybody else, so why don't we kick it off? First, a big thank you for everybody joining tonight's call. One of the primary focuses of this committee is really to just ensure public participation in the master steering process. So you showing up tonight is a big part of that. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening. Tonight's call will be hosted by our consultants, Barrett Planning Group. They're going to drive the discussion primarily through updates on existing conditions through 8 chapters or categories that we've looked at. Some real exciting stuff about you'll learn about the town of Hamilton and really calling out some key issues. From there, I think it really starts to get exciting as we dig in, drill into visioning and work into a breakout group, and we'll start talking about what we want Hamilton to look like 15 years from now. So with that, I'd like to hand it off to Judy Barrett. She's the principal and managing director of Barrett Planning Group. Judy?
So thank you, Bill. I hope you can all hear me. I am Judy Barrett. I'm so happy to be working with Hamilton because I had the privilege of leading the last master plan that was finished in 2004. And it's always fun to go back to a community where you worked before and see how things have changed and see things that have not changed and how the community is doing. So we started working with the town around Christmas time to try to move the process forward with the master plan. And we had a community meeting, I think it was early February, to try to get a sense of how people are feeling about the way things are going in town. And that was a very wonderful meeting that we had. Many of you may, in fact, have been there. We've done a lot of work since then, notably by finishing what Bill referred to as the sort of inventory of existing conditions. It's really a big chunk of every master plan is kind of understanding where you are today, because if you don't get that down, then it's really hard to sort of think about now really where you want to go and how are you going to get there. So that work has substantially been finished. And now we want to get into, I think with everybody this evening, starting to put together some of the seeds of what would be called a vision statement for the master plan, as well as some key goals to guide recommendations for each of the major elements of the master plan. And just so everybody understands what those are, since a master plan for a city or town is largely a physical development plan, it's more than that, but that's at its root what it is. We always look at kind of the land use pattern in the community and how have you developed and why have you developed the way you have. The master plan also looks at housing, at economic development, at the natural resource inventory that you have in your community, your open space, which we know is very near and dear to many people who live in Hamilton. We look at municipal facilities. Does the town have both the personnel and the facilities it needs to be able to attend to the business of being a local government? And then, of course, looking at transportation and historical resources as well. So those pieces are put together at this point, and we're trying to build on those. I'm actually going to step back tonight and because Tyler Marin, who's going to be leading this meeting, has really done the lion's share of work on this project and just done such a wonderful job. And I don't want to steal his thunder. So I'm going to step back and let Tyler take over. I'm not known for being quiet, so I may have some things to add along the way, but at this point, I'd say it's really in Tyler's hands. So I will step back and turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Judy. And thank you, Bill, for that introduction. It's a real pleasure to be before you all tonight, to be, in Hamilton in spirit. And, as Judy alluded to, some of your names I recognize from the process so far. A lot of you I don't recognize, which is great. And I welcome all of you and hope that you'll get something out of this meeting tonight. So I've got a slideshow for you. So let me start sharing my screen. Presenter mode. Excellent. So to start off with, basic introductions. We've sort of covered some of these already. Bill took role for the committee, so you got to see some of the committee members. I saw a few more trickle in after he did that, but I just want to thank all the members of the Master Plan Committee. They play a really vital role in this process, just as a consultant team sort of floating around town on our own, we would not be nearly as effective as we are with, a committed like local partner, and that is this committee, as well as your wonderful town planner, Patrick Ruffin, who's also here. They've been a huge help, and they've been our liaisons. They've helped us organize these meetings. They've reviewed drafts. They've met regularly. They've done a lot of work on behalf of the community, and we're pleased to have them with us tonight as well. You already met most of the consultant team. When it comes time to do our participatory breakout groups, we're going to break into a couple groups because we had a good turnout, which is always a nice problem to have, too many people. So we're going to have a couple different simultaneous discussion groups doing the same activities and discussions. And my colleague, Alexis Lanzalotta, will help me run those. And we also have our colleague, Catherine Dennison, behind the boards, working on the tech stuff. So those are our thank yous. So a brief overview of the agenda tonight. So there's really two main goals of this meeting, and I think both Judy and Bill alluded to them, but just to say it plainly, one, we want to report back some of the initial findings and content and information from the first chapter of this plan, which the committee in the town has helped us reach a final draft of. That's, just to let you know what we've been working on, and also to familiarize you with sort of what goes in a master plan, getting your mind jogged a little bit when it comes time to talk about what some of the issues are. And then the other main part of this that I think should take up the bulk of the evening and is, perhaps the real meat of it, although I don't want to sell the presentation short, are the group discussions. We really see this as an opportunity for, for all of us to have a community conversation, for you all to be able to, share what's important to you, what you want to see out of the plan. And I'll be talking more about what the actual questions we're going to ask are later. But those are the two main things. Just to go over a few housekeeping items, over the past 3 years, I'm sure you've heard very similar items to these, but just during the presentation, you can just make sure your microphone's muted. Questions are welcome, but if you could please put them in the chat, that would be great. Either someone from our team or even the committee, if you feel like answering a question, you can do that. You don't have to. Someone will either respond to you in the chat, or I will pause for questions after the first chunk of the presentation. So if something is not clear or other questions come up, please do that. And then just while we're in the chat, while we're in the breakout groups, when we're talking, let's just remember to, listen and learn from your fellow Hamilton residents. And when we disagree, which you will, because we haven't worked in a community yet where everybody agrees, but when you do disagree, just remember to do it respectfully, and we'll hear everybody. So that's how this will go. So let me just jump right into the content. So if you attended our last meeting or any other master plan meetings, maybe some of this will be familiar to you. Apologies for being repetitive, but for those of you who are just joining the process now, I think it helps to just understand a bit about what it is we're actually doing with this project. So a master plan, essentially, it is some of the longest term planning that we typically do. It's a long range plan, usually like 15-ish years, sometimes 20. I think it's been almost 20 years since you adopted your last plan back in 2004. And it's an opportunity to take like a bird's eye view of all the issues in town. A lot of planning sometimes is done by the seat of your pants as, issues arise, but this is a chance to take a step back, assess, clearly where we are in all different topic areas, and come together as a community to really think about a vision for the future. So the main chapters of a master plan, what goes into it are the existing conditions, sometimes called inventory and assessment, but it all just means detailed description of where Hamilton is at now. And we use tons of data sources, local interviews, past plans, state data, local data, all kinds of data to put those sections together, and summarizing those will be the bulk of the presentation portion of tonight. And then there's the vision and goals, and the key issues are a part of that. So that's identifying where do we want to be. The goals are basically like, in an ideal world, if we do everything right in 15 years, what's Hamilton like? And so the logic of it is you figure out where you are in the existing conditions. Based on those and community engagement, you figure out what the key issues are that need to be addressed over the next 15 years. And you set those goals. And then the final piece of that is an actual implementation plan and policy framework of recommendations. So why bother doing all this? It's always good to justify why you're doing something, right? It's not just a waste of time. This is, like I said, a rare opportunity in planning to actually, take the long view. A good, master planning process that produces a good plan will be a document that can clearly articulate the community's wants and desires and rationale, and that can be useful in a case where you might need to defend a land use decision. You can point to the master plan and say, 5 years ago, back in 2023, the town agreed that this was the vision for this part of town. It gets the community together and talking, and can shed light on new issues, and provides, a single accounting of all the biggest issues in the community, and collects everyone's voices together. And it's a good way to, hopefully, if you implement it well, to keep track of a bunch of disparate elements at once. So it's a really valuable document, and we hope to, in partnership with all of you participating tonight, produce something that will really serve Hamilton well over the next 15 years. So a brief recap of the process so far. Judy really went over a lot of this, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but there was a initial phase one with starting back in 2021. There was a community meeting then, there was a survey, there was some initial drafting of documents. We weren't yet involved. We were brought in at phase two to sort of shepherd the project forward. And since we've started that pretty much at the beginning of this year, we had that February meeting. We've done a lot of interviews with town staff, small groups of interested and involved stakeholders. And like I said earlier, regularly met with the committee and produced a new final draft of our existing conditions section. And then phase three, which is upcoming, that's not what we're in now. We're part of phase two. The final part of it is to get these key issues and goals set. But then phase three would be actually crafting policy recommendations and an implementation plan to actually reach those goals. And here are just some images from the last two community meetings. This one on the bottom, some of you might recognize if you were there back in February, on a day that was 0 degrees, if you remember that. So time to actually get into some of the findings from the chapter. So I'm not going to go over each and every single one of these elements right now, because I'm going to touch on each of them. But I also wanted to just highlight this framework that you see on the right here, the Protect, Grow, Provide framework. This is something that the committee had developed even before we started work on the project. And you'll hear more about that in the breakout sessions. But essentially, that's like the lens through which we're going to view all of these topics and issues and recommendations, thinking about what Hamilton needs to protect, what it needs to grow, and what it needs to provide for its residents. So just to note, this is not a comprehensive list of the findings. This is just a small sampling to give you an idea. The full draft will eventually be available for you to read if you're interested, and obviously we're still developing certain sections of it. So, start off with land use. This is sort of an interesting section because it's very wide-reaching. It sort of touches all of the other sections. You can sort of think of land use as asking, the question where for all the other elements. So if you're thinking about economic development, okay, where do we want to encourage economic development and what land use tools do we have to do that? Same with, housing or open space preservation. What areas of town are best for housing? What areas of town have good access to transportation? It all connects back to sort of the spatial layout of the town. So land use is pretty relevant to all the other sections. So the main components here are, I think Judy mentioned this, talking about historic development trends. How did the town come to look the way it does today? Excuse me. When were neighborhoods built? When, along what streets did commercial development occur? And we take a look at, what the land use landscape of Hamilton is today. And we also spend a lot of time taking a look at zoning regulations. So just very briefly, if you're not someone who spends a lot of their days reading zoning regulations, like some of us, essentially that's the main tool that towns use to regulate land use. And the two main things it does is it says where certain uses are allowed, like, okay, this is where we want commercial uses, this is where we want residential uses, and commercial uses aren't allowed here, that sort of thing. And it also describes dimensional regulations to sort of control what development will look like and the scale of it and all that. So the reason we spend so much time looking at that is because that, essentially is what is allowed now. So that's really going to shape, all the current and future development. So understanding what your zoning says is basically understanding what the town says is allowed to be built. So we go into that. Now these charts are just a breakdown. On the left here is a breakdown by total area of your zoning districts. This is just chopping the town into bits. So these three big slices are all residential zones. This biggest chunk here is residential agriculture, so it encourages a mix of single-family homes and agriculture. That's very important to Hamilton's history. But if you'll notice, 99.7% of the land area is zoned primarily for residential uses, and you just have a little bit of commercial in the downtown. So whether you like that or don't like that, it's important to recognize that that's one contributing factor among many. Zoning can't, make the market do things the market doesn't want to do. But whenever you're thinking about, okay, we want this type of development, this is what we want our town to look like, you have to go back to the zoning and see, okay, what is allowed to happen? If we want more commercial development, well, where? The zoning doesn't allow for it. If we want more residential development, where is that allowed? So then the chart on the right is just breaking down some of the current land uses. So on the left is what it's zoned for. On the right are the categories that things fall into. So the biggest single category is just single family residential. That's one house, one lot. Many of you may live in such homes. That's the primary form of residential development in most Massachusetts towns. But then there's also a large chunk that is clicked on the screen. There's also a large chunk that is, conservation land or has at least some level of protection or is vacant and undeveloped. And I mean, those two uses, single family residential and this sort of large block of, conservation and undeveloped land is the vast majority of land in Hamilton. So that sort of gives you an idea of what the current landscape is. And then part of the next step of the plan is, okay, what do we want to see in terms of that? Is, are we where we want to be in terms of land use distribution? Where do we want to see certain uses? So, transportation. I think perhaps the first thing that comes to mind when you think of, transportation or transportation planning might be, roads and highways, because we live in a society where private vehicles are the primary mode of transit. And that certainly is a big component of the transportation section. It takes a look at things like, traffic patterns, circulation, road conditions, what sort of work has been done on roads, things like that. But it also encompasses all modes of transportation, talks about bike infrastructure, sidewalks, trails, and other pedestrian infrastructure. And of course, Hamilton is somewhat unique in that you have a commuter rail station right in your downtown area, and that is a significant asset and a significant mode of transportation that a lot of smaller towns do not have access to. So that majorly shapes the transportation landscape in town. So this table here is an example of some of the type of data you'll see in this section. This is just looking at some of the expenditures for improving roads and highways in the town over the past few years. The section deals with, recent expenditures, what the town's current priorities for fixing up infrastructure are. Like, for example, this table says that in the past few years, the town, there was a $1 million paving project on Chewbacca Road. And, the town actively prioritizes, upcoming infrastructure projects, applies for state grants, things like that. So the transportation section deals with all that. And it also deals with commuting patterns and driving distances, although economic development also touches on that. That's what this map is, where you can drive to within 30 minutes from Hamilton. And that sort of gives you an idea of what's accessible to residents. So natural resource areas. This is essentially looking at the sensitive and valuable landscapes, resources, wetlands, wildlife, water bodies, all of the natural areas that the town needs to think about in terms of, preservation and conservation. So this map to the left is an example of one of the topics that this section discusses, and that is aquifer protection. It talks about, first of all, what are the sensitive areas. It talks about the regulatory frameworks in place for protecting those areas and some of the local bodies and local policies for doing so. So, so over here, this map is showing areas that have been identified as those that have potential impacts to groundwater supply, which influences drinking water pulled from aquifers. So this is showing areas where activity has the potential to impact those resources. And this section also goes into, like I said, all kinds of other conservation areas, floodplains. There's a list of areas with known flooding, and about 50% of the town's land is either wetlands or has some sort of like steep slope or difficult to develop landscape. So really, natural resource areas and open space, which I'll get to in a bit, is huge for Hamilton because that's the primary concern on so much of the town's land. Right, cultural and historic resources. So this touches on topics like notable historic areas. The town has several areas that are on the National Register of Historic Places. Asbury Grove is included in that, but also the Hamilton Local Historic District which is located roughly in the area along Bay Road near where Town Hall is. This sign up here on the right demarcates the start of the historic district. And just talking about, what the town's historic assets are, there's the inventory aspect, but also talking about what the framework's in place for preservation, sort of like the natural resource areas. They're sort of similar, but looking at different types of resources. One is what we want to preserve from the natural world, and one is what we want to preserve from our history. And as you can see here, there's quite a few individual, buildings, structures, and other objects that are part of this. In addition to the two main historic areas, there's plenty of individual historic buildings and other objects, including the famous Sherman tank that are officially listed as historic. So open space and recreation. The difference between this and what we talked about back here in natural resource areas is that this is a lot more concerned with outdoor recreation and public access, and the sort of a way to think about your natural space as an amenity. So this map on the left shows the protected open space in Hamilton, and there's quite a bit, much of it protected in perpetuity. This includes, just conservation land that might have hiking trails, forests, active outdoor recreation, like fields, sports fields, horse pastures, and even sometimes, agricultural land is considered part of open space. And there's some areas that might function as open space that aren't, formally designated as such. Like if you look on this map, you might see an area where you do engage in outdoor recreation, but isn't included here. And that's probably because there's no formal designation or protection related to it. So we want to think about, how to deal with those areas as well as those that are formally protected. And this is also where we talk a lot about the town's official recreation programs, the recreation department, what sort of recreation amenities are open to residents. Housing. So there's a lot of different aspects to housing. The two major parts of the housing section, you can think of it, are looking at demographic trends and also looking directly at housing market trends. So it's important to look at demographics because that tells us who lives in town, and housing is directly related to, one's ability to live in a place. All those people who live in town, they're living, somewhere. So that can give us a sense of what the community's needs are. Like on the right here, we look at age distribution between over the past decade from 2011 to 2016 to 2021. From left to right is moving forward in time. So this like maroon bar is 2021. So as you can see, the older over 55 age groups have been increasing, while some of the others have either been decreasing or staying relatively the same. So that tells us something about the ability to predict future needs. Perhaps an aging population has their own unique housing needs, and looking at demographic information can help us identify potential areas to focus on in determining future housing policy. And of course, looking at home sales, inventory of housing stock, home prices. And this is also where a discussion of housing affordability comes in. So this chart on the left shows the median sales price for a home in Hamilton over the past decade. And you can see it's risen from, and the median is just, the one right in the middle. I don't know how common a term that is. I took statistics in school, but just under $400,000 median sales price for a home to now today it's a bit under 800,000. So a roughly double over the past decade. So, we take a look at, the affordable housing inventory. We look at who in Hamilton is, having trouble or is burdened by housing costs. And, to get a holistic view of what the housing needs over the next 15 years might be, and the local mechanisms in place to address those needs. Okay, economic development. This is the section that talks about employment trends. It lists some of the largest employers in town, which is the table you can see at the bottom right here. So it's about, the employers and the jobs in town, but it also talks about, where do Hamilton residents work? As you might imagine, a lot of them work elsewhere because there's relatively few, commercial entities and other employers in Hamilton, although there are several major ones. The town of Hamilton is the largest employer, although you will note that the second largest employer, according to the state's database, is Gordon Conwell, which, as you probably all know, will be leaving Hamilton in the relatively near future. So, keep that in mind as you're looking at this list. We take a look at, the tax side of things, looking at revenues and the differing revenues from different types of uses, unemployment rates, the relative strength of industries in Hamilton versus other locations. So just an overall picture. And even though Hamilton has a relatively small business community, there's still a lot there. And there's still a lot of vibrant small businesses, as well as some larger businesses too. And this other figure here is just showing unemployment rates, and that Hamilton's have always been a bit lower than that of Massachusetts and of the rest of Essex County. But after the spike in unemployment due to the pandemic, it seems that Hamilton has recovered a bit better than the state and county as a whole, because the gap is now larger than it was pre-pandemic. So that, tells us something about the kinds of jobs that were impacted by the pandemic and the kinds of jobs that folks in Hamilton tend to have. So the final section here, it is the final section, is community facilities and services. So this talks all about, the functions of the town. It talks about the town departments, the staffing of those departments. It talks about town-owned properties, town hall, the public safety complex, the schools. We have information and data, from emergency responders, the police and fire. We have information in there about, the town budget and spending. And of course, plenty about the Hamilton Wenham Regional School District, because that is, a major community service that the town prides itself on. So this table here is just tracking enrollment, and you can see that in the past couple of years, enrollment has been down, and that's part of broader trends about figuring out what the town needs to provide in terms of services to residents. And we talk about water, DPW, trash pickup, things like that. And other major capital improvement projects, we know that a major project related to the schools and sports fields was just approved. And, town hall there's plans in the works for some sort of renovation of town hall. So it also lists some of the major capital improvement needs to worry about over the 15-year period. So I will pause there. That was just a brief recap of some of what you can expect from the plan. Hopefully that gave you a better idea of what you would find in the plan once you see it, and provide some good context for the conversation we're about to have. So let me look in the chat for questions. Okay, I see GD. Okay, I got a question of the 9.4% of vacant land, how much is actually buildable versus wetland or otherwise restricted? That's a good question. Let's see, off the top of my head, I think I'd say maybe about a third of it is considered developable. Although you have to keep in mind that this is all based on your assessor's records and data. So some of what makes land undevelopable might just be zoning regulations that could one day change. It's not, necessarily an inherent property of that piece of land that it could never ever be developed. It just means that, right now it cannot be developed, and the assessor cares about that for valuation of the property. So
Right.
I'd say the point of the plan actually does break down the vacant land by type in more detail, but I think that the biggest takeaway is that there's very little actual new developable land in Hamilton. It's going to either be, in a few small areas, redevelopment of existing areas, and most of the rest of the town is either conservation or owned by an institution or in other ways not developable.
And that's one of the big challenges, I think, for suburbs of the, sort of maturity level, if you will, of a Hamilton, is that there may not be much land left that's unrestricted and available for development, but that doesn't mean the town is going to somehow freeze in the way it is now. Because what happens in cases like this is that you move into sort of a redevelopment mode of change. And so things like tear downs and bigger houses that can really change the character of neighborhoods, those become sort of more paramount issues than how many new housing units are we going to see built in our town. So the challenges don't go away just because there's not much land left. And I think that's something we're all really thinking about with Hamilton in this plan.
Mhm. Okay, another question in the chat, 500 employees for Hamilton is much higher than I would have guessed. Any details on that? Who does it include, basically? So let me go back to that.
So that's going to include any employees that are reported by employers who are subject to the unemployment insurance laws. So those are payroll positions. It actually does not include people who are self-employed or people who are working for establishments that don't have to pay unemployment insurance. But, it's going to be public sector jobs. It could be certainly a constellation of part-time and full-time work. If you look at some of the retail or food service establishments around the South Hamilton area, there's part-time jobs there, there's full-time jobs there, and they would add up. So that's not an FTE number. It's reported payroll employees.
Okay, next question. How many 2 or 3 families are there, and how has this changed in the last 20 years? Let me go back to Hamilton land uses because, okay, it ended up looking a little cluttered in the, but if you see, there's a category for land for residential uses with 2 or more units on a lot, and it is, well, I can't zoom in, but you'd sort of have to see it. It's like 0.4% of land. Now, to be fair, those units take up less land because they're denser. So there are relatively few properties in Hamilton that are 2 units or more. There are some in terms of I think the actual plan in the housing section will probably have actual numbers for those. I can't pull those off the top of my head. But I think we definitely want to recognize in the plan too that there has been in recent years, an increasing housing diversity in town. There's been some larger for Hamilton developments going on in the past few years. So I think the housing section will reflect that. Those options are growing, but it is definitely true that Hamilton is very much still a single family residential primary community.
Oh, yeah.
And then the next question, is Gordon College listed as a business? So to be clear, I might not have been clear enough explaining this. This is the largest employers that are located in the town of Hamilton. So these are not necessarily where most people who live in Hamilton work. Does that make sense? So these are just the locations in Hamilton that have the most employees. And so if someone is working at Gordon College and, driving over there who lives in Hamilton, that's not captured here. Okay, that's all I see in the chat. Oh, no. Okay, how many properties over 20 acres that could be subdivided?
I suspect we probably don't have that information readily available tonight. It is certainly something that we can make sure is quantified in the plan. But I don't think we have those data sets that we could just instantly open them up, but it's a good question.
Yeah, I can't give you an answer off the top of my head. Some of this stuff I might know off the top of my head, but
I just would want to be
Not that.
careful about the data. We would need to go look it up and probably can't do that right now.
right. But there's definitely a visual representation of the vacant land. Although actually, you're probably asking about properties that are not currently vacant, but might have portions of it that could be subdivided. That, yeah, I can't say right now what the.
Yeah.
But I agree, that is a good question.
Yep.
Okay. Last time I said we had no more questions and was about to move on, a new one popped up, but
Should probably move on anyway. I know you've
I'll
got
move on.
exciting
I-
things planned here.
No, we're doing okay on time. So I really want to get into the actual breakout group discussions now with minimal explanation. Because that's really one of the main things we want to get out of this evening. So just to go over what we're sort of asking you to do. So we are at the point where we really need to start crafting and formulating the key issues and goals chapters. I went over this towards the beginning, but issues are, you can think of those as what are the most important things that town needs to address. And some of those might belong to a specific topic area we talked about, some might span multiple. And the goals are derived from those, and those are basically, where do we want to be in 15 years? And, the key issues and goals connect, because if you meet the goal, that's addressing the key issues. So we want to get your brains going and generate some thought on what these key issues and goals should be. So to do that, it's very simple. We want to try to keep this as much like just a conversation as possible. So we're about to break out into two separate groups. One group will be with me, one group will be with my colleague Alexis, and we will be going through 3 different groupings of topics. And for each one, we're going to use the protect, provide, grow as our sort of guiding light, our guideline, but something doesn't fit like strictly into that. Don't spend a ton of time thinking about like, oh, is this grow, is this provide, or is it both? Well, we can sort of work with that, but we really want this to just prompt you to start the conversation. So we have sorted this into 3 segments because we just don't have time to do a full like individual analysis for each topic. So we're going to take them in groups at a time. So they've been grouped in a way that hopefully makes sense, just to guide the conversation. So open space and natural and historic resources in one segment, transportation and services and facilities in one segment, and then housing and economic development in the 3rd segment. And I didn't put land use specifically in any of them because, as I alluded to before, land use really touches all of these. I think that there's very few key issues that are just land use, and that in the course of talking about open space issues, housing issues, we'll touch on the land use elements as well. So I think we'll be talking about land use throughout. So with that, I'll stop sharing. And we will now be sorted into groups. Catherine, you can go ahead and put us into
Recording in progress.
Okay. Are we all back? Looks like we're all back. So it is 8:30 now. So in the interest of making sure that everybody hears everything they need to hear before you all start leaving, let me just very quickly put the slides back up and let you know that I don't know how it was in the other group, but in our group, we did get to all three sections, although just barely. So if there's anything you did not get the chance to say, you can go to www.hamiltonmasterplan.com. There is a feedback widget on there, and you can put your feedback there. Just say, didn't get to it at the meeting, but here's what I want to provide for in services and facilities. So you can always do that. We always encourage feedback over not feedback. The more feedback we get, the better. We had some really great conversations in my group. I'm sure it was the case in the other group. So I want to really thank all of you for participating, for listening to your fellow residents, and for contributing your thoughts. So both of these boards will eventually be made publicly available. I imagine we'll put them up on the master plan website. There will certainly be, in the final plan, we're including meeting summaries of this and all the other meetings. So you will get to see what the other group talked about and get to see your own contributions reflected. What else? So stay tuned. There's not a lot public engagement on the books right now for phase 3 because that has not been, formally formulated and scheduled. There's no, contract for that, but eventually you should keep your eyes out for any news. And of course, eventually we'll finish up this phase of the project and you'll be able to see it soon, hopefully. We hope to finish drafting this phase. I think we're still on track to finish sometime in June. Getting a full draft of this entire phase 2 inventory and assessment, key issues and goals. So look forward to that. And then the only thing missing will be the policy and implementation. And I think that based on the conversations we had tonight, there's some real pressing issues that need, thoughtful and creative policy solutions. So we've taken the first step to developing that framework. So thank you. The original plan was to do a very brief report out, but it is after 8:30, so I'm not going to make you do that. You'll be able to see all the results, but all I can say for my group is the conversation. It was great. Judy, is there anything else we need to leave these folks with? Am I forgetting anything?
No, I think that it sounds like the discussions were lively and interesting, and they're going to be very helpful to us in terms of trying to develop the next pieces of the plan, the vision, the goals, and the key issues. It'll be great. They'll be very helpful, which is super, because that's where we want to get to.
Yes,
So we can then talk about the implementation program.
absolutely. So, yep, thank you to the committee, to town staff, and to all of you who showed up.
Oh, Tyler, just a question. Will there be another session for community input? In other words, where does this go now? You're taking this input, what happens to it?
So we're going to take the input from tonight, all the input we've gathered from past meetings, all the interviews we've done, the survey that was done way back in, I think that was 2021, get it all together and try to synthesize it into the key issues chapter where we will try to articulate and summarize all the major themes that emerged from this. And same with the goals. So our task is now to really try to synthesize all this and really try to, in a way that is helpful and faithful to what we've heard, produce that summary of it, basically, and including thoughts from our analysis of the inventory and assessment too. And like I said, even if all the details from this meeting don't end up in that chapter, they will be included in the final plan as the appendix at least. So that's where we go from here. We go into writing and thinking mode with the help of the committee. They're going to help us iron this out into a set of really good issues and goals.
And then that report goes to whom?
It will go to the Master Plan Steering Committee, the Planning Board, presumably the Select Board. We are having discussions about our group continuing to work with the town to finish out the rest of the plan. I mean, just to be clear, the ultimate product, if you will, from our work is the inventory, vision and goals, and an assessment of key issues. But not going to the level of recommendations or an implementation program. We're talking with the town now about being able to add that to our work so we can give you a complete master plan. But I think that the sort of key issues piece, which from my point of view is really what points you in the direction of what are the things this plan needs to address. And that's a lot of what we're focusing on right now. And I'm sure that document will be made available publicly, but first it will be vetted with the Master Plan Committee.
And the master plan is ultimately, the complete master plan is ultimately voted on and adopted by the planning board.
Judy, question, since you and I were probably the only people on this Zoom meeting that were involved in the 2004 master plan, I was wondering, is there any opportunity to somehow connect the two in terms of looking back and saying, you know, we did a 2004 master plan, made these recommendations, and here's what has been implemented, to show that they actually do have an impact?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that really needs to happen, Rick. I mean, part of what I would like to see us be able to get to is to go back and look at what the recommendations were. And there are probably a lot that never made it, but some did. And I also think that the other thing the community needs to take into account is that I don't really think the real proof of a quote successful master plan is that somehow today we were able to see what 20 years ahead would be. It's whether that plan, the plan that you adopt, does the policy framework it gives you for thinking through problems, thinking through challenges, does it help you get through things that you couldn't foresee coming? If it can do that, then that's really an important role of a master plan. It's not that it just sees everything that's coming. It's got to be able to be helpful to you when you run into things that could not be foreseen today. So I think we need to look back at that plan with that lens as well, Rick.
Okay, good, thanks.
Yeah.
Marnie, you're muted.
Judy, I agree with what you just said, and I think it would be really efficient to look back to see what the town accomplished and then to adjust the things that weren't done with based on what information you've received through this process to date. That would be really efficient. And I think the town did accomplish some things, but really what you're saying is that plan should provide a framework for problem solving. You can't predict what the solution is, but what is the framework for planning boards and other boards and committees to look at a problem and then see what the recommendations are or the framework for solving them in the context of this plan would be.
That's right. That to me is the most important value of the plan.
Right.
So I mean, we definitely need to include that. I mean, we would do that, I think, in almost any master plan. It's like, here's where you were, and here's what you said you want to do. What happened? Now, some things are simply ongoing. It isn't like they have a finite beginning, middle, and an end. Some are just because they're so important, you just keep doing them. And some proved to be harder than you thought, and some turned out to maybe not be such great ideas, and others were the next best thing since sliced bread. And, you know, understanding kind of what came out of that plan, I think, can be helpful for a community to assess its capacity today for what can we do going forward. And if there are big things we want to do, how do we get the capacity to do them? So we will do that.
Right.
Anybody else have any questions? I'm sorry.
You've done good work so far, Judy, and your team. I compliment you.
Well, thank you. Tyler has really just steered this project very well, and I'm really pleased, and I'm happy to be back. It was a wonderful town to work in 20 years ago, and obviously it still is now. So I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, on that lovely note, I hope that you all have a great night. Thank you so much again for taking the time out to be with us this evening, and keep your ear to the ground for future updates on the process. Bye, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.